What do we need to do here? Oh, now we're live.
Okay, I was gonna say, I always check it and it
Thank
did
you.
not appear that it was actually on.
Tell everybody thanks to the mayor for making sure we were live. Now I got to play from current slide. Okay, let's go back one. Okay, this should start to look familiar to you, this slide. For everybody playing along at home also, if you're listening, Brent from Computer Services was kind enough to put a link to the PDFs of this presentation. So you can actually link on the presentation and flip between the windows if you like, or just follow along on the presentation. Warehousing, industrial, manufacturing. This is the breakdown of your development. And as we talked about in the past, you have to keep in mind about 50% of your prime development ground is going for warehousing and distribution. Warehousing and distribution is a blip on our income tax receipts. So we don't get the bang for the buck out of that we do out of other types of development. And it's something that's very, very important when you're determining how you want the community to look, how you want your revenues to be, and how sustainable you want to be economically while you're developing and moving forward. Council isn't discussing economic development as a whole. And a question for you is the Alliance now in the real estate development business, or are they in the economic development business, or are they in both? It's something you need to consider. Like earlier in a public meeting, the mayor had stated that she had the Alliance looking around the airport as to what was going on there. Should there be more discussion of this topic in strategic planning? This council should be reviewing what the long-term financial impact of Findlay's growth with regard to the community's expressed wishes in your strategic plan. You do have some control over that. You have it through zoning, you have it through some of the rules you use. You have a lot of ways to impact how we develop, what types of businesses we get, where we get them. I bring this up every year as well. Polycom. This is your Polycom ranking. We dropped from 151 out of 543 micropolitans to 179 this year. To me, this number is more important than site selection saying you're a great place to build a building, because it doesn't say what type of building. It doesn't say what type of business. You could be number one for building a warehouse, but in terms of the economic sustainability of your community, in the last 5 years, we have really dropped with regard to how Polycom is reviewing our economic structure. In my opinion, it's time for City Council to ask that question as to why that's happening. Still, we're still considered strong though. And one of the reasons we're still considered strong is the entrepreneurial base of our community is huge. We have a lot, think about plumbers, HVAC, think about the independent trucks that are going around town and the things they're doing. So one of the questions you need to ask is zoning a positive or a negative for traditional small and web-based businesses? How do you have to look at it differently? Remember, I think Sheila Packard started in a garage. Are your laws, are your rules that lead to business generation, that leads to revenue, running your city, favorable for starting the modern types of businesses that are being started? Why are there so many food trucks? Because it's so challenging to open a restaurant. It's expensive. Real estate's not cheap. The health codes and compliances are significant in a physical structure, much more expensive than adapting something on 4 wheels right now. And that's why you see so many food trucks. They can make them profitable more easily. So whether that's good or bad is beside the point. The point is, how are we as a community, what types of businesses do we want? And are we creating rules which are allowing those businesses to happen? And ultimately, generating the revenue we need to see to pay our people to provide our basic services of police, water, fire, sewer, streets. The community new employment wages, I've mentioned this before. If we're going to continue to improve ourselves, we've got to beat 60,000 a year with the new jobs that are created in our community. So you got to beat $30 an hour. The Alliance is a private economic development entity, but their updates do not report what the potential wages are in the businesses they are recruiting. I would encourage us, and I think I mentioned this to you once, Dennis, privately. If they're going to put what they're recruiting on, we should know if they're going to look for support from us. What is the average wage of that business they're working on, even if they don't want to tell us what business it is? That's very, very important. Local economy. employed to date in Hancock County. I show you this every year. Our employment is cyclical. We hit a nice peak in 2019, which corresponds to our peak in 99. This is countywide employment. You can't say the demographics don't support more employment because we have a gap right here. The question is, are the jobs we're bringing motivating individuals to enter that workforce? We know there are people who are not motivated to enter that workforce right now. Affordable housing or higher jobs, higher wage jobs. Again, Moody's states Finley's median income is too low. It's trending down. They say our per capita value is too low. I talked to Moody's again. I just saw him last week at a meeting and had a conversation. We're due for an update in the not too distant future. Our Polycom ranking, I just mentioned that to you. The US Census shows Finley's population is declining, and Ohio Department of Development just put out a countywide population projection showing us declining through 2050 down to 63,000 people. We're over 70,000 right now in the county. Ohio's projected in most of its areas similar to ours to have not insignificant declines in population. So you have challenges as leaders in your community to create an environment to foster a counterflow to those projections. We do have community leaders openly speaking out about some things going on. And again, keep in mind, our housing cost is 26% below the national average. All of our housing is affordable here when you compare it around the country. All of it. And that's very true. Again, small, safe community. It's the business community's job to make money. We want them to flourish. We want them to be profitable, pay lots to us in income taxes. That's a good thing. It's council's job to set policy parameters which ensure development and growth benefits the entire community. And make sure you know the difference between community-wide economic development and the real estate development businesses. It's time you learn that difference and know that difference. It's a very, very important difference. In a nutshell, real estate development is selling a piece of property to the highest bidder, irregardless of what they're going to put on it, as long as it conforms to the rules. Economic development is making sure that that sale conforms to a plan that you strategically put in place to take your community, that area that you're developing, the direction you want to take. The city's evolving organization. Right now, the administration, as we mentioned the other day, has an organization that's not been vetted through council yet. It may not conform to some of the city's codified ordinances, potentially some state law things, depending when we're dealing with water and sewer. That needs to be resolved prior to the budget passing in January. We need to know it's good. And the executive time automated timekeeping system has revealed some significant Department of Labor issues and some other issues. We've been keeping the administration informed along the way. And as we're finding these issues and getting them worked out, we do have one minor one left. We have minor overpayment payroll. We put a request out to the service director to get that money collected so we can get it back prior to the state issuing a finding for recovery. It's a little over $100. It's not much money, but it needs to be returned to the city. The state requires that we account for every dollar of the taxpayer money. So that's good that they put those rules in place. I put this up here because the Auditor of State has put out some special training, and they're focusing on things with regards to findings for recovery. And Auditor Faber is very proud of his record of collecting monies around the state that were improperly spent or stolen or whatever. But so public money that's illegally expended, that's obvious. Public money collected but not accounted for. Again, something we don't deal with here. Public money due but not collected. We've had some cases of that, and we've had to work out some special situations like with DFID and different things, and we work with them. And public property converted or misappropriated. That's what the state calls it, but basically it's the topic we need to talk about. City of Findlay has been doing significant work for entities that are not directly related to the city. So the future work to fit and conform with what the state auditor's office is telling us must be approved by the legislative authority proactively. So we have to know ahead of time that we're going to do something, pass legislation that allows us to fund it and do it. This means no expired contracts, as has happened in the past. Also, no retroactive approval of work done without prior authority. We can't go backwards, and they've made that clear in the training that Ginger just went through. Entities right now that this would apply to that we're doing work with: Hancock County, DFID, Findlay City Schools, the area villages with regard to income tax collections, and also the area villages with regard to our Public Works Division. They call and occasionally we help and do things for them. That work has to be pre-agreed to and pre-approved by the legislative authority. And then ODOT. Being neighborly is great, but it can't happen at the expense of the city of Findlay taxpayer without an approved proper public purpose for wages, services, equipment, materials, etc., and legislation. Who defines proper public purpose? Generally, it's the legislative authority, as we've been trained by the state auditor's office, which is the reason that it has to come through you folks. So there'll be some changes in how we do some business when we're helping other communities this year so that I can pay those bills. All right. How are we doing? 5:14, you had a meeting at 6. I think we're a third of the way through, so we're doing pretty good. Your payroll in 2023 was 24.7 million. We're running at 78% of that payroll right now, which is a little bit ahead, but that makes sense, right? Because you gave raises and whatnot. So it's running as expected. So you're looking at a $25.5 to $26 million payroll. So you'll see some changes in that probably next year. We're negotiating a year. You're going to get a new pay ordinance. Right now, you have 24 in the first column, 323 full-time, 352 FTEs, which are part-timers, still 17 electeds, 5 people retired, 2 rehired, 12 resignations. 2025 wages, I normally would tell you what we were projecting for the administration. Those projections are not complete. They're being done and being calculated based on information that Rob provided us. That information from non-union employees will come to you in the form of a pay ordinance. And we work with the administration, Don Essex and Tara work together with that generally, and everybody has a different input into it. And then it ultimately will come to you for approval. We still have the transparency site. Matter of fact, the last graph I showed you came off the transparency site at FindlayOhioFinances.com. The financial performance, your income tax revenues are coming in as expected. Real estate tax revenues as expected, and I think they're fully in now. Hotel, motel tax as expected, it's up significantly, which is what we came off of COVID. Hotels are filled up. We've got a lot of good economic activity in the community, so that's good. State aid is exceeding expectations. As we all know, we've never seen this kind of grant money that we've seen in the last several years coming to Findlay, Ohio. It's phenomenal that we've been able to take advantage of that. In terms of your opinion, whether that's a good or a bad thing is set aside. Economic growth revenues are mixed. Revenues versus expenditures are mixed. Most departments are doing pretty good. We don't have anybody that's outstandingly missing the mark. Legal expenses, as we know, are exceeding the expected. Environmental reliability risks are mixed, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Personnel benefit and pension costs, as expected, and they are rising. They're rising as every time you raise a wage, you have a match and you have your benefits that go along with that. So we expect that to rise. Debt service expenditures are as expected. Financial reserves and fund balances are mixed, but not in a negative way. And then your overall fixed assets, your capital investments, once again, the state auditors come back and said, our numbers indicate we still have not invested enough in our existing capital from their perspective. It's something that we need to keep in mind. We have a robust capital improvement plan, and it's good that we continue to do that, but we still haven't got off the caution indicator on that. And this one here that we've got every few years is when we come off a real good year of income tax, and then we get a more normalized year. Like last year, we came down, and sometimes that flags them because of depending what that difference is. You know, we get a $1.5 million to $2 million difference. It shows up in their computer system.
Jim, can you go back for a minute? What is that number, column number 11?
That is the investment in capital. In other words, what they're saying is, from their perspective, state auditor's perspective, is your depreciation. So when you depreciate something, we put a pipe in the ground. We book it. We say the life of that pipe is 20 years. They're looking at that depreciated, that amount that's depreciated off, saying the amount that's depreciated off is, it appears that you may not be putting enough money, that you may be undercapitalized in replacing that infrastructure quickly enough. That's what they're saying. So that goes to, though, what Jeremy's doing, the long-range planning for water and sewer, right? The whole point of that is to make sure we stay up on that. So the results of that may come back and show us that, yeah, that is true. We're going to have to up how we're going at that. Or he may find that we're doing it adequately. It's something else that's being reflected there. We'll just have to see how it comes out when the reports are done.
So are those read off just like every 20 years something should be replaced? Or does that go off of
No, it looks at
condition? I mean, because like asphalt, Main Street, I'll be replacing that 3 times before a small residential road, stuff like that.
it's aggregate. So it's everything that we have. And they say based on everything you have and its book value versus the original book value versus the amount that's depreciated off, that ratio, they're saying, is slightly out of balance. It's cautionary. You should be looking at that ratio to make sure across the board for all your capital infrastructure. That includes buildings too. So there's a lot of things that are incorporated in that.
It's everything, right? It's all capital.
All capital assets, booked capital assets.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is the aggregate, and as you can see, we've been behind since 2016. So this is
With their formula.
versus their formula.
Yeah.
And that was always a great argument with Paul Smelser. You love that.
Yeah, I'm not here to say it's good or bad. What I'm here to say is council needs to be aware of it. When we come out of the recession, you guys, what happened was you took your allocation of capital improvements, they took it down to 8% one year, and they took it, almost down to near nothing. And skipping 1 year of capital improvements, roads, you miss a year or two of roads. I mean, it took forever to get to the point where we were able to maintain the roads on a basis that allows us to rotate the whole city. And, if you get a little bit behind, take a city like Toledo, you never catch up. And there are certain things like that we were unable to improve. And it's coming back. The other thing was we used to, get this, your income tax used to 100% go to capital. 100% go to capital when we first had it. As you know, that's not true. We do 20%. The historic high of that has been 22. We've had some years where we've been as high as 25. And you guys have also thrown money at it. Plus, also going back to the grant dollars, we've had a lot of advantage with the grant money that's come in. But it's something to be aware of. This is how the state looks at it. This is how, and to some extent, the outside world when they're looking at our financials. If it's flagged at the state with regard, they got it out of the blue book that Dennis read last night. Brought it in. Yeah. So, all right. And as we just said, proposing 80-20 to the capital improvements account. Unless you guys want to change that, I'll ask you here on the last slide if we're going to change it or keep it at 20%. The general fund expenses through the end of the calendar year, what will happen is as part of the budget process, we put out a request to the department heads as to how much of your budget do you expect to spend? And then they call us and they say, well, what do you mean? And we say, well, at the end of the year, you have right now 100,000 left in your budget. Are you going to spend 100 or are you going to spend 50 or are you going to spend 110? And they tell us and we book all that. And then as part of that projected budget, we give you an estimated cash carry forward of unappropriated balance carry forward. And that's where that number comes from. So I don't have that. I won't have that for another month or so. The city income tax is beginning to normalize. We are also beginning to track unclaimed W-2 income tax receipts. There's a purpose to that. I'll come back to that in a second. The total city income tax receipts are down as expected for 23. Again, we're normalizing coming off those big years on our business tax collections. And the projected 25 revenues, projecting them is a little bit of a challenge yet as we normalize. But I think Mary is wonderful to work with. And between her and myself, we're pretty comfortable going forward and making sure that we have a good idea what we're doing. Here's your income tax collections. So your big years, the big corporate years, Sales Speedway, as we know, some of the other things that happened, Goodyear buying Cooper. When you have options, you exercise your options and they come through as W-2 income. So we see some of that down here in the withholding. Withholding is the lion's share of your money that comes in. The business, when that comes in, that's a windfall. We used to have a rule, the Rich Road proposed and got passed through one of your prior councils, that said, when you have a windfall in business tax that exceeds the projection, that windfall will be set aside and go to capital improvements for capital infrastructure investment. That rule's not in place now. And so this money that comes in is also allocated 80-20, just like everything else. It's just all the same. We take the cost of running the income tax department off the top and then divide what's left by 80% general fund, 20% capital improvements.
Jim, is that something council should do?
That rule?
Yeah, when we have a large windfall like that.
That was quite a while.
Well, it was in place until,
No, but I mean, should we,
15
when we
years.
know something like that's coming along, should we discuss that?
I appreciate that question.
Paul Schmoder's $1 conversation.
Well, yeah. What
That's
did
the
I
one. That was Schmoder's $1 conversation. So when we put extra money towards CapEx with the quote unquote $1, that was in essence doing the Rich Road rule.
Yeah.
What we did that is council, the administration did that collectively versus having a ordinance that set a rule that said you must do.
Yeah, and
I wouldn't suggest that.
Yeah, two things have changed since we did that regularly. One thing that's changed is the amount of grant money that comes in. We saw a lot of grant money come into the airport regularly, but not across the board like we see for some of the projects we've been able to do and that the administration's been able to acquire through their application process. So that's been one aspect. The second thing is how we're administering the business of the city of Finley is different in terms of the mode. You guys don't have, in my perspective, and Don might be able to comment on this. From my perspective, you don't have the pressure coming from the outside that prior councils used to get. When I came in 2011, every other week there was somebody in the mayor's office asking for $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million, or there were projects everywhere. So one of the big blessings here is the community foundation has so much discretionary, millions of discretionary dollars that they're able to invest in the community. So one of the things you're able to say when somebody walks in with that project they want the city to fund, or other cities would have to fund, or it would never happen, is you can say, have you tried the community foundation first? Because if they find it of value, they will probably at least seed it for you to get it going. So that's another thing that protects us there. And then the third thing is, I don't want to project it too rosy of a picture, but we've been very blessed and very proactive in flushing out our reserves properly. We've worked very hard to do that in terms of your self-insurance, your health, your rainy days fully done, your flood. We just added $2.5 million to. By doing that, you've taken, again, known dollars and put them in areas that you know you're going to spend the money or need the money one day. And with your self-insurance fund, you're actually protecting yourself better from liability than you could otherwise if you didn't have those dollars for
other
addressing
thing
some of
I
those
would-
issues.
We're no longer doing the estimated tax collection process with our business tax collections. And so those were known dollars that were fully flushed out, where now we still see refund requests
Yeah.
in a delayed fashion, where we allocated those dollars and then ended up having to pay them back. It would cost.
The likelihood of getting a large refund request today is much higher than it was a couple years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago. All right, debt. I'm not going to go into the debt other than to say that you're becoming almost debt-free. Your water system will be effectively debt-free next year. Your sewer system is debt-free today. Your general fund, 2033 is your last debt payment if we don't pay it early. I think the call is 26 or 28. I think it's 26. But right now, I've started the process of working with the municipal advisor and bond counsel. Will be involved at some point to take our current debt policy that was developed in 2008 and updating it based on current best practices, IRS and SEC regulations. So we'll take into consideration debt limits, debt structuring practices, debt issuance practices, and management practices. And then we have compliance issues and some other things that we have to do, and we have to work with bond counsel to do that every year. So we meet our SEC and some of the other requirements that we have because of the type of debt that we issue. So that's that process has started. Other projections. Right now, your general fund year-end unappropriated balance is expected to be about 25 million. Your 3-month minimum reserve is about 9.3 million. So you're in a strong position there with your unappropriated balance. Capital improvements restricted account is about 4.1 million. I think it's the legislation that's going to spend some of that this week or next week or in 2 weeks. But that will spend down as Jeremy brings projects to you out of capital. Water fund, you're projected right now to end with about 5.6 million, and sewer, WPC, about 14.4 million this year. Those are the numbers I'm looking at today. They generally come in a little bit stronger, but I don't want to say that, and you never want to promise that, because the second that you do that, it gets weaker. So those are the projections. They are what they are.
Are they typical, like on a trend right now, or any of these out of the norms?
No, the interesting thing was not very long ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, your strongest fund in the city was your water fund. Those have flipped. And the irony of that is your water fund went basically debt free. It eliminated huge chunks of debt very quickly. And as that debt rolled off, and what I'm saying here, there's still we got a big debt payment next year in the water fund and this year yet, but you don't have a restricted account for water for plant replacement like you do for sewer, the EPA required one. I'm not sure if we are funding the EPA required one to our required amount or not. I wouldn't have access to those rules, Dave Beach would, but certainly we should consider doing that for the water fund so that you're setting money aside in a known quantity for ultimately reinvesting into that infrastructure. Sewer is a little different in the sense that it's so corrosive in that plant with the processes that they use. You have much higher ongoing maintenance, and the plant is actually almost rebuilding itself as you do your operational maintenance over the years, and that's a big part of that. But the reason we built the sewer plant we have is one day the EPA came down and said, "Thou shalt have a new sewer plant." My 3 fears in life are God, the IRS, and the EPA. In that order. So the EPA got us, and we ended up. It was 90, almost. It was what? When I came in, it was 70% of our cash flow was going for debt payments on the sewer. I mean, it's unbelievable. When they first did it, it had to be 85 or 90. I never looked at the actual number, but it was huge.
On the restricted replacement on the sewer, we can still move money out of that, or it's there for life. So if we did it on the water side.
Well, it's a restricted account, depending on in other words, it's not a fund. It's within the sewer fund. So but what happens is you move it over there, you restrict it off, and depending on the type of legislation that's written to restrict off, you may or may not retain that ability. But the idea is that when you're in strong financial positions, going to what Dennis is asking, when you're in a strong financial position or you have a windfall, if you have a realistic, reasonable set aside for those funds, you can do it. You can proactively, in your capital plan, set aside monies to replace and build something special down the road so that when you're ready to build it, the money's there. And cities actively do that. So let's set aside $500,000 a year towards the big engagement project 20 years from now. So when we get there, I have 10 million plus the interest sitting in the account ready to use to build a big engagement project that we do.
When we've looked at that with the water fund, that is something that the administration has discussed. And really, we don't recommend it, especially right now because of the position of the fund and restricting dollars that we may need for repairs as we're building up a minimum reserve. That's something that we could look at longer term. But again, once you restrict those dollars, you can't bring them back out. So what we would rather do is set a minimum balance that then has a evaluation period and looking at that larger financial plan. So you are setting aside money it's being held in the main account, but then you have kind of a process for evaluating what type of repairs you would maybe want to have a larger set aside in 3 years for an investment.
That makes
And-
sense in a current administration. It's when the next ones come, we want
Well-
to make sure we continue to
Well,
get a
that-
plan that.
And I think
We have a
that's the
limited time here.
policy and the process that we're looking at with the water and sewer committee is evaluating that. So that is kind of that annual process review that council is helping set out the strategy for the next couple of years.
We have a limited time here, but I'm gonna counterpoint to one major thing, well, two major things, actually. One, water and sewer, if you are looking at that, you don't have our municipal advisory involved, you're doing a disservice to yourself. Because that's why we hired. And number two, what that position, this council doesn't bring to the forefront is, when you set up these set-asides, you define what the money can be used for. So you control what you can spend it for. In other words, you don't want, if you're using a system today and you have a windfall of money from the users of that system today, is it right to take money from that windfall and spend it on a new component to that system, a new subdivision or a new area for development? Or should that money be set aside for maintaining and protecting and investing in the capital of the system that's there today, so that the people that paid that money in benefit from that money long term? That is the difference, and you don't necessarily restrict it in a way that it can be used. That would be a misnomer, and it's just not true if the paperwork is done right. And you can change our list for the restricted replacement and improvement account changes as the components of the plan changes. In other words, some of the things that were on that list in 1989 haven't been used in that sewer system since 1999. And they don't exist, so they're not on the list. It's the responsibility of your superintendent, the person who's in charge of that system, to make sure those things are accurate and take us the direction we need to go. So there are multiple sides to that, but again, I would encourage the committee to involve our municipal advisor, because they are experts. And I'm going to take a moment, because this is really important. The municipal advisor that we have deals with multi tens millions of dollars size cities 10 times our size, maybe bigger. We are a small client to them that has a large importance. They were kind enough to agree to work with us. They have an expertise which is rare and special in the business. We need to take advantage of that. We need to understand how fortunate we are that they work with us. That's enough of that. Subsidies. General fund subsidizes enterprise funds that don't cash flow. By definition, under state law, an enterprise fund is supposed to cash flow. But as talked about in strategic planning, the airport's important enough. We don't care if it cash flows enough. We know it's or not. It's an important aspect of our economic development approach to the world, and it's important for our companies that we have that tool there for them to use. And we saw that big time in recent years. So your biggest subsidies: streets, pool, airport. Parking's doing wonderful. You gotta give them kudos for how that's working out. But when you review, there should be a consideration of a business cost benefit as you're doing your budgeting process, council, with regard to the state fuel tax and motor vehicle fuels not supporting the street department. They did here when that tax first came out. It was more than enough. Now it's not. Is the taxpayer truly benefiting from the YMCA operations arrangement? Again, that's a large subsidy that we're giving them. We don't know what happens, how much money they're making. We don't know how much money they're not making. We know we guarantee to supplement them if they don't make money to a very, to a level. But what are they making? Maybe you want to reevaluate that. The airport board should establish fiscal or financial boundaries for operations and capital. The board should be involved in saying, hey, here's the boundaries. We understand we're going to subsidize this. There's going to be a lot of time for this. We know we get a lot of grant money, but here's some boundaries we'd like to see us stay within as we're developing that airport long term. The deputy auditor has informed the departments of a proper chargeback process so so we comply with the state auditor's requirements. The city's auditor's office continues to work towards proper fiscal compliance and accounting of expenses and revenues with the operational practices. You have in your opioid abatement fund a balance of $55,100. There may have been a deposit in that that's either due or about to come in, but right now it's 55.1 as of my most current report. And your ARPA fund unappropriated balance is 63,402. They must be spent truly obligated before year end. And I know there's legislation in your packet for today to shuffle some of that money around. Continued liability. This is a new slide for you. I wanted to consolidate. I had them in different places over the last couple of years and wanted to add one. Extremely high continued litigation costs, as we know. We also know now we had a pretty robust conversation in the Income Tax Board that members are not protected from citizens' other communities, like the citizen that's been suing the city so regularly today. But here's something that I have learned from some of the meetings I've gone to. All work outside the city of Findlay government, where there is not an ironclad waiver of liability agreement, is risky. It also impacts workers' comp coverage. So we probably should develop, if we don't already have one, a standard release document that's incorporated in any agreements or MOUs that we're doing with those outside entities that protect us where we can be protected in case something happens when we're using our equipment and our people. And environmental, you have no coverage for environmental except your self-insurance fund. So do you know where your unlined landfills are? Do you know where any of your landfills are, where they were? Going all the way back to when the city was created in the 1800s. What's the right and proper level of cleanup for our citizens? And we still do not, as far as I know, have a fiduciary in place to advise this council on the decisions we're making with regard to environmental. Okay, trying to get done in the last few minutes. So,
I gotta go.
yeah, self-insurance, city, we need to continue to set aside funds and protect that. Here's a fact for you though. This is important. Large cities self-insure their liability. Findlay does not. We probably should begin to consider whether that's a realistic path for us based on our cash position and long-term, but it's going to take balancing some of those things, and the monies you can save is not insignificant. Those premiums are big. It's an integral part of your health plan reserves for protecting your health insurance and paying bills should we have a really bad year or two with our health insurance. It also ties to workers' compensation and your insurance premiums for general liability. So right now we had funded it up to $2 million. If you guys want to keep it at $2 million, it's going to take $127,000 based on what was spent to date in just this year in 2024. We're up to $127,000. All right. The 25 and 26 budgets will again be created simultaneously. The mayor has asked that we have a one-night review of the budget on 12/10, if that works for everybody. You guys would determine the starting time. And also, I need to just confirm that your capital allocation would be 80/20, 20% capital improvements. If there's no objection, we'll do our budgets based on that. Any concern with the capital allocation?
No,
Good.
I don't know. I still think, I've said this every year for the last couple of years, I think we need to increase that amount.
So we would like to keep it as is,
I know,
however.
that's what you say every year.
Well, no. You and I had the conversation a couple of weeks ago in strategic planning, as we're talking about a couple of things, there may be a push for some additional revenue to streets and resurfacing, different things like that to help catch up with some of the different things. But I would like to keep the allocation for this budget process so we can have that conversation separately, and then we can do
Later.
additional appropriation if necessary.
Fair.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Any other questions for me, generally or specific? Welcome to another budget year.
I can't wait.
Department heads are up and running. I think they have their meeting Thursday. It's speaking of some of their base information. I think the salary stuff's going to take them a little bit longer this year to get to them, so they'll be working a little bit without that. So, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep, it's been a good time. We kept it shorter and I cut 11 slides out.
Well done.
And he came 11 minutes late.
I think I did that pretty well.
Well, things to take care of. See you guys down there today. Don't have too much fun in between.
All right, see you down there, folks.
Right, December 10th.
Yeah. So,
Make it work.